It was one of those nights where the snow didn't fall. It attacked, sideways, stinging, and loud against the windshield. Heater squealing like it was trying to quit. Lexi in the back seat still singing that ridiculous made-up Christmas song about gingerbread astronauts. I was 31, driving our old 2002 Dodge, trying not to think about how thin the tires felt in the turns. We were half a block from the bakery courtyard when Lexi stopped singing and said, real calm, "Daddy, that lady's a fairy who fell." I squinted through the blur and saw her, whiteout all around, and this woman in a camel coat, shoulder deep in the recycling bins behind Sanders Bakes. She wasn't panicking. She was searching, controlled, slow, like she knew exactly what she was losing. Quick note. Before we continue, share in the comments which city or country you're listening from, and let's continue. I should have kept driving. We don't have the kind of time or money that leaves room for charity pit stops. But Lexi, she's got this radar. She feels things. And even though I didn't say a word, my hands were already turning the wheel and pulling us up to the curb. The woman didn't notice us until I spoke. "Ma'am," I said, staying back, voice low like I was talking to a wounded animal. "What went missing?" She blinked snow off her lashes and said, almost too soft to hear, "My husband's recorder, Olympus. Tiffany cleaned and tossed it. It was in a craft bag. Trevor, he passed, and it has his last message. It has to be here." Her voice cracked like ice under a boot. She looked maybe 70, and her shoes, expensive, leather, ruined, sank deep into the slush. Hands bare, red from cold, working through the bin labeled paper only. I asked her name, and she said, "Hannah Sanders," like I was supposed to know her. I did. Everyone around here knows Sanders Bakes and Catering. 2 shops, a van line, blue awning with gold script. She wasn't rich, but she was comfortable. This wasn't comfortable. Mrs. Ward from the boutique next door poked her head out, scarf over her rollers. If it was paper, it's in the far tote. Craft bags go there. Stan, City grabs that before dawn. Porter splits it all overnight. And now we had a timer. I looked at Lexi in the back seat, boots already half off, face pressed to the window, and told her, "Stay in the van, sweet pea." She crossed her arms and said, "Teamwork's faster." And I didn't argue, just helped her out and held her hand. I told Hannah we'd look faster together. She didn't answer, just nodded, and we got to it. I've done worse. I had a stretch after my ex left where dumpsters weren't theoretical. You learn to look past the smell and the cold and just see. We worked in silence, our sleeves soaked, fingers burning. I went through 2 totes before I found a stack of butter-smeared invoices, cake boxes, and a sealed craft sack, blue tape across the fold. It was heavy, like something inside had weight. I didn't open it, just tucked it under my arm and made sure nobody saw me do it. Didn't want anyone to argue with what a broke man decides to keep. Lexi, standing on the van's floorboard like mission control, called out, "Nobody should be alone in snow. We got cocoa." That's how she invites people. Orders, really. I looked at Hannah, her hands shaking so bad she couldn't get her glove back on. Pride's a funny thing, but even she knew this wasn't a night to argue with a 6-year-old in fleece pajamas. "Come warm up," I said. "You can call whoever you need from our place." She hesitated. I get it. I live in a 2-room rental over a shop with pipes that rattle like they're haunted. But she gave me a small nod and said, "Thank you." Supper was bean stew, a poor man's stretch meal, padded with sausage ends. Hannah held the chipped mug like it was bone china. Lexi offered her the extra mini marshmallows, and Hannah said thank you again, softer this time, like the room meant more than the meal. When Lexi went off to brush her teeth, I grabbed the craft sack, cleared our table, and laid it all out slow. Under the greasy paper and a cracked cake ring was a gray Olympus recorder. Old belt, chewed edges, 2 AA batteries inside, rattling like bones in a coffin. I told Hannah I'd take a crack at the thing downstairs, and she asked if she could watch. Not nosy, just quiet like someone who didn't want to hand her grief over and leave. We headed down to the corner of the basement I'd carved out beneath our rental. No one would call it a shop except me. Pegboard I saved from a school clean-out, a folding table with a permanent lean, and a space heater that buzzed like a tired dog trying to hum itself to sleep. She didn't say much when I started, just stood near the steps with her gloves still on and her hands deep in the sleeves. I cracked the recorder's back open and laid its guts bare. Belt all stretched and gummy like old gum, heads fogged with residue. I got out my swabs, a bottle of isopropyl, the belt I'd sliced from a donor Walkman. Told her what I was doing step by step, not because she asked, but because silence would have made the walls press in too much. Most folks don't know you can even fix these, I said, cleaning the pinch roller. People think if it stops turning, it's trash. She nodded. We throw out more than we should, not just machines. Lexi wandered down in penguin pajamas, sock feet soft on the stairs, holding one of my flathead drivers like a wand. "I'm the cooling crew," she said, serious as court. Then she leaned over and blew on a screw I'd just set aside. Like that settled it. Hannah laughed. Real, not polite. And I swear it changed the whole air down there. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. Her voice, when she spoke again, had less glass in it. "I haven't laughed since July," she said. "That's not a metaphor. I gave the motor a test spin. No power yet, just a dry run. It turned true, smooth, no grind. I didn't dare use her tape first. That's asking for pain. So I grabbed a junk cassette from my bin, an old aerobics mix with tinny synths, and ran it for 10 seconds. When it played clean, I slid in Trevor's tape like I was laying down something sacred. I pressed play with 2 fingers, gentle as touching a newborn. "Hey, love. If you're hearing this, it means I got brave." That voice hit like a quiet train. Steady, not weak. Like he knew someone would be there to listen. I stopped it before more could unravel and handed the recorder over. "It's there," I said. "The machine works." She didn't speak. Just held it like a relic. Like maybe her heart was stuck in rewind. We drove her home because she said she couldn't sleep anywhere else. Her place sat above the original bakery, brick, proud, held up by years of yeast and sweat. When we pulled into the side lot, I noticed the porch light was on, and 3 silhouettes waited behind the lace curtains. Their shapes didn't move when we got out. That kind of stillness always reads like a trap. Clark answered the door, late 30s, pressed coat, face like a spreadsheet. Looked at me like I was a miscalculation. Olivia stood just behind him, same age range, pearl earrings, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then Braden, soft-eyed, stood off to the right like he wasn't sure he belonged on either side. "Mother, who is this man?" Clark asked like he was managing a crisis instead of opening the door to his mother. I set Lexi down and said, "Stan Phillips. I fix small machines." Lexi added, "He fixed her voice box thing," and I bit back a smile. Olivia gave a noise that was half gasp, half judgment. "You brought a stranger here?" "He's the reason I have your father's voice tonight," Hannah said. Calm, clear, no apology. That changed the room's temperature by about 5 degrees. Not warm, just less frozen. Braden's eyes flicked to me, then to the floor. A man who wanted to be kind, but couldn't find a safe window to open it. Then Clark did what guys like him always do when they feel control slipping. He reached for money. From his inner coat pocket came a rubber-banded stack. Hundreds, 16 of them. I counted out of habit. Not greed, just something your brain does when you've been broke long enough. He held it out like a tip. "For your trouble. We're done here." I didn't take it. I didn't even reach. Just said, "No." He blinked, confused. Men like Clark don't hear no from strangers, especially ones in flannel and thrifted boots. Hannah moved before he could insist. She took the money out of his hand and shoved it back into his coat like it was lint. "Don't embarrass yourself," she said. And she said thank you to me again. Voice clear, steady, sharp enough to cut through Clark's nonsense. We left it there. I got Lexi back in the van without another word. Hannah stood in the doorway while we pulled out, holding the recorder like a lifeline. Next morning, she showed up at my place with a thermos of weak coffee and 2-day-old almond croissants, which she insisted still counted as gratitude. "I thought you might want to know what they said," she told me. No sugarcoating. Clark called me a signature chaser. Olivia muttered about optics and people taking advantage of grief. Braden, nothing. Not even a breath. "Silence is still a vote," I said. She nodded. "Yeah, but I've stopped counting them." Lexi woke me before the sun even thought about rising, tugging the blanket with cold fingers and whispering, "Did Miss Hannah listen yet?" I blinked at the ceiling. My back still ached from crouching over the workbench the night before, but there was no saying no to that voice. We opened our 2 gifts after pancakes from a box, 1 pair of socks for her, 1 sketch pad for me that she'd drawn on already. Inside, she'd taped a crayon picture of me with legs way too long and a speech bubble that said, "Team Forever." That started the day better than anything store-bought could have. Around noon, I spotted a dark sedan roll up like a penguin in church shoes, slow, out of place on our patchy curb. Hannah stepped out in a deep green coat, the kind that made her look like she meant business, but still knew how to bake a pie. In her arms, 2 bakery crates, packed tight. Lexi pressed her face to the window. "She brought food. That means she likes us." I opened the door before Hannah knocked. "I was wondering if I could spend a few hours with your family," she said. Her voice held just enough hope to make my throat itch. "You're already here," I said. Lexi launched into a hug like she'd been practicing it all morning. Hannah bent to meet her halfway, and the crate tipped a little, but she didn't flinch. I reheated the turkey in dented pans that rattled if you stirred too hard. Hannah set the table like it was a ceremony. Napkins folded, cutlery lined up, even though half of it was from yard sales. She even wedged a piece of cardboard under the bad leg of the table before I could warn her. It sat level after that, like the room itself respected her effort. We ate in that kind of quiet that only feels awkward if you're afraid of it. Lexi hummed through her mashed potatoes, and Hannah kept glancing at the recorder sitting near the cocoa mugs like it might bite her. After cocoa seconds, Lexi's term, not mine, Hannah finally said it. "I haven't pressed play yet," she said. "I'm afraid of the end." Lexi looked up from her mug, her mouth ringed with chocolate, and said, "If he wrote it, he meant it for now." I didn't add anything. There's no improving on wisdom like that. I told Hannah we could copy the tape before she played it. That way, whatever happened, the original wouldn't have to carry all the pressure. She nodded like it gave her permission to breathe. I texted Diana Price, our downstairs neighbor. She worked as a media specialist at Lexi's school and helped me find books about astronauts and girls who fix robots. She replied fast. "Be there in 15. No fuss." True to her word, Diana came in boots dusted with snow, her dark hair in a loose knot like always, and a canvas bag full of cables. She hugged Lexi first, always did, then nodded to me like we had a standing agreement not to make things complicated. "Technic's still running?" she asked, already setting up. "Like a champ," I said. I pulled out the old cassette deck I'd inherited from a neighbor 3 apartments ago, ran the line out to Diana's USB interface, and let her do her magic. On her screen, the software made a skinny mountain range as the tape ran. Trevor's voice turned into digital waves we could save. "I can normalize levels later," Diana said. "Want a WAV and a backup MP3? WAV for sure. Stick the MP3 on a thumb drive if you've got one." Hannah hadn't said a word. Her fingers were knotted together so tight I thought she might snap her own knuckles. When the transfer finished, Diana handed her a pair of headphones and walked to the kitchen like she understood her job was done. I didn't hover. A man knows when to give a widow her space. I stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall. Lexi slipped beside me, took my hand and whispered, "We're still a team if she cries." And she did cry, but soft, quiet, almost reverent, like the sound wasn't hers to own, but just passing through. After, Hannah printed out Trevor's words and read them once under her breath, mouthing syllables like they were relics. Then she asked Diana if she had a silver thumb drive. Diana pulled one from her bag and labeled it TS for H. In those neat, no-nonsense letters she puts on everything from storybooks to school loaner tablets. We ate the tart late, even though it felt too fancy for our chipped plates. Hannah told Lexi stories about proofing dough by touch, how Trevor used to hum scales when the ovens preheated. Diana stayed for one slice, then grabbed her bag and left with a simple wave that meant everything without saying it. Before she walked out, Hannah held the recorder to her chest, like it still had warmth in it, and said, "I'll be back tomorrow with a proper thank you that isn't food." Lexi, arms crossed and feet swinging off the chair, replied, "Bring stories," like she was hiring for a permanent position. Later that night, when Lexi finally fell asleep, I went to the bench, plugged in the silver drive, and copied the files to 2 separate folders, one labeled Backup, the other Safe. A week passed before Hannah gave me the nod to digitize Side B. I didn't ask why it took that long. Grief works like slow rain. It soaks you when it's ready, not on your schedule. I cued the tape, hit play, and let the machine roll. Most of Side B was piano. Simple stuff, major scales, maybe warm-ups. Then, near the end, Trevor's voice again, calm and tired. "If they start treating you like an asset instead of a wife," he said, "go where the laughter is." I listened to that line 3 times. Then I made a second copy and burned it onto a disk, just in case flash drives failed someday. I knew she'd want it safe. The next morning I bundled up and walked to the alley behind Sanders Bakes to thank Mrs. Ward. She was already out back brushing snow off her salt bins and tossing stale seed to birds that hadn't gotten the memo about migration. "You found it, huh?" she said, not even looking up. I had a feeling. I nodded. "Yeah, in the far bin." She pointed with her scraper. "Paper gets hauled at 4. Trash goes at 6. Lucky for you that Kraft bag sat. Most nights it'd be gone before sunrise." Then she handed me a brown lunch sack full of rubber bands, real old ones, wide and stiff like they'd been around since cassette tapes were still sold at drugstores. "I save 'em," she said. "Never know when something needs holding." I took the bag without arguing. Folks like Mrs. Ward don't give junk. They give what they can give. Back in town, I stopped by Sanders Bakes, walked in quiet past the morning rush, and left a card addressed to Tiffany Harris. She was the one who tossed the bag in the first place. Hannah told me Tiffany cried for an hour straight, frosting still on her gloves, and begged to quit. I wrote 5 words inside the card. "Accidents happen. We're all human." Then I tucked in a $10 coffee gift card we couldn't afford, but gave anyway. Some things just feel necessary. That afternoon, Mrs. Perry knocked with a familiar look on her face. That mix of curiosity and purpose, only the boldest retirees carry like a badge. She held out a gold pocket watch wrapped in tissue paper. "You fixed my toaster last spring," she said. "Now try this old thing. It's been quiet since before my Ray passed." I took it, careful, like it might sigh if handled wrong. Her vote of confidence meant more than any ad. Around here, reputation was currency, and that gesture traveled faster than any flyer ever could. Inside, our bills were stacked like a crooked fence across the counter. Past due notice for electric, a red warning from the gas company, rent coming due in 6 days. I still worked nights unloading pallets at the hardware distributor, 3 shifts a week, but it barely held things steady. The basement bench kept us alive. Lamps, radios, an ancient blender buried under smoothie crust that smelled like strawberry chalk. 2 days later, I got hit. A city inspector knocked around noon. Not rude, just official. He carried a clipboard, a yellow sticker, and a worn-out patience like he'd already been through a dozen basements that week. "I've got a report on this address," he said. "Someone sent in a photo of the window lit late. Said you were running unpermitted electrical." I didn't deny it. The heater, the soldering lamp, even the power strip. It wasn't code, not by a mile, but I kept it safe. No sparks, no shortcuts. Just the kind of quiet grind that gets frowned at when it doesn't fit in a form. He stuck the yellow notice on the outside of the cellar door and gave me a copy of the write-up. Get a permit, or stop working. I'm just the messenger. At the top of the form, filed per anonymous complaint. I don't scare easy, but that phrase, that one cut. That night I sat with the notice in my lap, trying to make sense of the wait. Could have been anything. Noise, lights, smells. People get weird when they think you're getting ahead with less than they have. But the photo? That meant someone had been watching. Someone who wanted to shut me down, not just complain. Next morning I stopped by Mrs. Ward's with the rubber band bag, thinking I'd return it just to talk. She met me at the door with a fresh bag of day-old muffins and a look that said she already knew. I don't pry, Stan, she said, handing over the bag. But a man in a tan coat came by last week, asked me where to report hazards behind the bakery, said he was concerned for community safety. She squinted at me. Square jaw, expensive watch, looked like one of those fellas from the Sanders Flyers. I didn't need her to say the name. I already knew it was Clark. She added, I mind my own business mostly, but sometimes it stops being right to stay quiet. I thanked her, told her I appreciated it more than she probably knew, and carried those muffins home like a sealed folder of evidence. I didn't tell Hannah that night, didn't even bring it up. She came by with a bag of King Arthur flour and a laugh that hadn't shown up in her voice since before Christmas. She spent the evening teaching Lexi how to proof dough with the back of her fingers. Light pressure, then a tiny press to see if the dough bounced back. Watching them bent over the counter, hands dusty, hair pulled back, I knew this moment mattered more than whatever paper was pinned to my cellar door. Some fights could wait. Later, when Lexi was brushing her teeth, Diana knocked with a small stack of printouts from the school's community board. I pulled these for you, she said. There's a grant clinic at the library on the 2nd, also a permit workshop next Thursday. They'll help you sort that yellow notice stuff. I flipped through the flyers. Small fonts, big hopes. You think I've got a shot? She didn't hesitate. You've got work worth doing. They'll see it. She held the stack against my chest until I took it. I don't cry easy, but her kindness had that weight. The kind you don't know how much you need it until it shows up in your hands. That night, as I tucked Lexi in, she looked up at me with her chin on her pillow and asked, Are we in trouble? I sat on the edge of her bed and told her, No, sweetheart. We're not in trouble. We just need to do it right. She nodded once. We always do. And the way she said it, like it was both a fact and a promise, left no room for anything but trying. In early January, Hannah invited us to a Sunday lunch upstairs at the bakery. She said, No fuss, but folks only say that when they know there'll be fuss anyway. I ironed my best shirt, the one with the elbow patch that looks intentional if you squint, and helped Lexi braid her hair. The stairwell smelled like warm sugar and bleach. Upstairs, the table was set like something out of a catalog shoot. Linen napkins, polished forks, salad plates, dessert plates, glasses that had been wiped twice. Hannah stood at the head of the table, composed but not casual, like she'd thought about this for days. Clark and Olivia were already seated, one on each side of her like matching sentries. Braden stood off to the side, pouring water like a waiter unsure of the tip. Glad you could make it, Hannah said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Clark nodded once at me. Olivia said, Lexi, that dress is darling, in a tone that made me wonder if she meant it or just didn't have anything better. We sat. I kept my elbows off the table. Lexi leaned close and whispered, Feels like a museum. Hannah brought out roast chicken, herb potatoes, and a squash tart she said was Trevor's favorite. Olivia took a small portion of everything and arranged it neatly on her plate. Clark asked Braden to pass the pepper, like the middle brother was a butler instead of blood. Braden looked at me halfway through the meal and asked, So, What kind of repairs do you specialize in? Or is it just whatever shows up? Whatever shows up, I said. If it's got a cord or a crank, I'll look at it. He nodded politely, but I could tell he didn't know what half those things meant. Never held something broken long enough to care about the fix. Then Olivia cleared her throat, set down her fork, and said, "Mother, we've booked a showing for that condo tour next weekend, the one with the elevator and no exterior maintenance. Thought you might like to come." Hannah didn't blink. "I live over my ovens," she said. Steady, like a flag refusing to lower. Clark reached into a leather folio and slid a folded page toward me across the table like we were at a job interview. I opened it. Handwritten. Formal, but not legal. It said, in neat business writing, that a consultant stipend would be made available to me if I agreed to refrain from involvement in personal or financial matters relating to Mrs. Sanders. It even mentioned protecting the legacy of the family enterprise. I folded it back in half and slid it across the table without saying a word. Lexi, who'd brought her crayons and a pad like she always does when adults get boring, looked up at the room, frowned, and said loud enough to cut through, "We're a team forever, so don't be weird." Hannah laughed, real and loud, the kind that echoes. Olivia flinched like someone popped a balloon next to her ear. After pie, lemon, with the meringue peaked like a mountain range, Hannah asked if I could stay a few minutes longer. The kids sat still, like they sensed something shifting. She set her laptop on the counter, the screen already cued to Trevor's digitized file. She pressed play. Trevor's voice came through the speaker, thin but clear. "If you're hearing this, you kept the ovens hot. Good. That means you're still choosing to show up, and that's always enough." Olivia's hand tightened around her napkin. Clark's jaw locked in place. Hannah let it play for another minute. "And if anyone pushes you to be smaller for their comfort, smile and bake them their answer." Then she stopped it, closed the laptop, put her hand on the edge of the counter, where the finish had worn off from years of rolling dough. Clark spoke first. "That recording could be manipulated." Olivia followed. "It's emotional, not exactly actionable." Hannah turned her head slowly, looked at both of them like she'd rehearsed this moment a dozen times. "It's mine," she said, "and I don't need it to be anything else." The silence afterward felt earned. Braden came up to me while I was getting Lexi's coat from the rack. He looked uncomfortable in a way that made me believe he meant it. "I'm sorry for how that went down," he said. "The tone, the offer, all of it." I didn't say anything. Then he added, "Tiffany's still getting blamed for the tape thing. That's not right. I gave her the checklist. It came from Clark. Said clear everything older than 3 years. That changed the air in my lungs. I nodded once and said, 'Appreciate you telling me.' On the walk home, Lexi told me the lemon pie was too tangy, but the potatoes were top tier. When we got inside, I told Hannah what Braden said. Her eyes didn't even twitch. She pulled out her phone, dialed Tiffany, and said, 'I want you back. I want you at the new shop, with a raise. You were honest. That matters more than a mistake.' She hung up without asking permission from anyone, and poured herself a glass of water. That was the first time I saw her pull a lever without apologizing afterward. She stood straighter after that. Taller even. Later that night, I bumped into Diana on the stairwell. She had a tote full of returns and her coat half zipped. "How was lunch?" she asked. I gave her the short version, the offer, the audio, Hannah's line in the flower. Diana nodded like it was exactly what she expected. "Some people think love's a ledger. They keep score even after everyone's left the game." Then she checked Lexi's library bag, tucked in a hamster book, and handed it off like it was just another errand. A month later, Hannah stopped by with a letter in her hand, sealed, but already opened. Clark had sent a cleaned-up version of the stipend offer through a lawyer, language like narrative management and perception alignment. Hannah held it up and said, "This belongs in a pamphlet, not a family." We both laughed. Then she fed it to my shredder, one page at a time. The stop work notice came in person, End of January. Wind sharp as bad news, and the same inspector from last time showed up again, clipboard in hand and sympathy in his face. "It's official now," he said, peeling the sticker and pressing it to the basement door. "Nothing with wires. Not until you're permitted. You're good at this, but you gotta get a space and do it right." I nodded. Didn't argue. He was just doing his job, and honestly, he looked more tired than I felt. But when I closed that basement door behind him, it hit me in the ribs. Hard. I needed that work like lungs. That week alone, I'd lined up a heater, a blender, and a church radio from Mrs. Perry's cousin. And Lexi had a field trip coming. Zoo and Science Center. $45. Which doesn't sound like much until it's the only extra you can't stretch into. I told myself I'd figure it out. Hannah showed up that evening like she had it timed. Coffee in one hand, manila folder in the other. She didn't knock. Just opened the door like someone who knew her answer would be better than my pride. "I circled 3 spaces," she said, flipping the folder open at the table. "This one's on Broad and Lynn. Needs paint. Rent's low. You could blink and miss it, but it's yours if you want it." I stared at the photo. Single door, 2 windows, sign above that said vacuum repair in faded block letters. Beige brick, nothing fancy. But the rent circled in red was a number I could imagine if I squinted hard enough. "I don't take charity," I told her. She didn't blink. "It's not charity if we both win. Business is about who shows up. You've shown up." I didn't answer. She slid a short contract across the table. Interest-free note, flexible timeline, no funny clauses, no fine print. Just 2 signatures and a repayment plan. "I've thrown more at bad cupcakes," she said. "Let me invest in something better." Lexi peeked over my shoulder and pointed to the photo. "We could paint that blue. Then it's like breathing sky." That broke me just enough to say yes. Diana came by that night with a binder so organized it could have passed for a tax professional's soul. She'd labeled it licenses, tax IDs, boring but necessary, and had printed tabs for every section. "We start with business registration," she said, already uncapping a pen. "Then zoning, then utilities. I made you a checklist." She sat across from me, reading forms out loud while Lexi drew tiny check marks next to each task I signed. Diana had this way of making complicated things sound like bedtime instructions. No judgment, no rush. Just, "Here's what's next." We hit a snag on the name. I wanted something clean. She suggested something clever. Hannah liked sentimental. We were still arguing when Lexi piped up, "Second Wind Repair, because things breathe again." And just like that, it stuck. That name hit me in the chest like memory and relief had a baby. I said it out loud once, then wrote it down twice just to be sure it wasn't a fluke. Hannah made her calls next. She started with the chamber, then rang her banker, then the landlord of the space. Her voice never changed. Clear, confident, no wobble. I watched her cross off names in a notebook like she'd been planning this for months. All those years of dough and deadlines, and she'd turned them into precision. The woman could have run a city if someone gave her a map in 24 hours. She glanced up once between calls and said, "Don't let men fool you. Most of them think women are delicate right until we rewire the place they're standing in." I didn't argue. She was already moving walls. The next day, I got a voicemail from Clark. "I'm aware of what's happening," he said. "This proximity, this arrangement, it raises questions, influence, boundaries, legacy. I'd advise you to think about how it looks." I saved it, in case he forgot what he sounded like when the world didn't center around him. On the first Saturday of demo, Tiffany showed up with 2 battered mixers in a dolly cart and a Ziploc full of handwritten notes. "Sorry they're dirty," she said, brushing snow off her sleeves. "One's from the old shop's back room. The other might just need a new armature." Lexi ran up and hugged her like she'd been missing all week. We cleared a folding table in the middle of the space and played What's This Part, while Lexi called out guesses, and Tiffany laughed every time she got one right. I paid Tiffany in cash, honest and fair, and handed her a business card with a fresh logo Diana printed. You're always welcome here, I told her. She smiled like someone who hadn't heard that in too long. By the second week, we had the drywall patched, a coat of primer on everything, and a plan to open by early March if the paperwork held. That afternoon, Mrs. Perry walked in during paint, carrying her pocket watch and a lemon loaf in a plastic clamshell. This street needed a shop like this again, she said, placing the loaf on the counter like it was a house blessing. Something with hands. I wiped paint off my palms and nodded. That kind of vote travels farther than any loan. Later that night, Hannah came by with soup, mushroom and barley, still steaming in a big thermos, and a folded paper tucked into the lid. She waited until Lexi was asleep and then sat with me at the work table. I wanted you to see this, she said, handing over the bank printout. I scanned the numbers and saw the transfer, her name, the storefront rent, the exact balance I needed to get the final deposit paid. She leaned back in the folding chair and said, "That was a dormant account Trevor used for inventory. I hated the word allowance then, and I hate it now. This isn't a handout. This is a stake." I looked at her across that unfinished space, drywall dust on her coat sleeve, and saw something shift in her face. Something solid, like she wasn't asking for approval anymore. "Thank you," I said. She tapped the table once, like sealing a deal. "Welcome to the second wind." The phone sat on my bench, buzzing once, then quiet. Hannah didn't rush to grab it. She kept her hand wrapped around the seized mixer arm while I worked the WD-40 in small, controlled bursts. Her coat hung on the peg behind her, sleeves dusted with flour. Lexi sat in the corner, kicking her heels under her station, watching like this was part of some important training. Then Hannah's phone chimed again, speaker still on from before, and we both heard Olivia's voice. I overstepped. I'm trying to do better. I didn't speak, just kept my grip on the mixer steady, while Hannah looked up once and met my eyes. There was no drama in her face, just that kind of tired peace you only get after a storm. With the lease signed, we'd been sanding and painting for days. Hannah brought tulips for the front counter because, she said, rooms need life, not just purpose. I'd built a pegboard wall straight enough to impress my own dad and hung tools by function and frequency. We didn't talk about legacy. We just made space for something real. I'd set a stool in the back corner with a laminated sign that read, Lexi's Station. She'd drawn gears on it in marker and made me promise nobody else could sit there unless they knew the team handshake, which was mostly just a fist bump and a wink. Still, rules are rules. That Thursday, Clark and Olivia walked in without knocking. Clark looked around like the room owed him something. Olivia held her purse in front of her like the air might stain it. "Do you understand the liability you're creating for our mother?" Clark asked, walking the space like he was doing a final inspection before condemnation. I wiped my hands on a shop towel and said, "I understand she makes her own choices." That stopped him, but not for long. He looked at the new breaker box, the clear floor space, the paperwork tacked neatly on the wall, and said, "You've made it look legitimate." "It is legitimate," I told him, "even if it makes you uncomfortable." Olivia didn't say a word, just nodded once and turned to leave. Clark followed, but not before scanning the place like he might find something unsafe to weaponize. That afternoon, Mrs. Ward called me over while I was locking up. "Heard something you might want to know," she said, standing in her doorway with a notepad in one hand and a biscuit in the other. "That tan-jacket son of Hannah's? I heard him on the phone outside the bakery bragging about that report, the one that shut your basement down." I blinked, slow. "You're sure?" "Positive. He called it anonymous, then said he hoped it would dislodge the situation." She shook her head, as if his own mother's choices are some infestation. We stood in silence, just watching the street like maybe we could wipe the footprints off it. I didn't tell Hannah right away. I forwarded the voicemail Clark had left weeks back, the one about influence and perception, and sent Mrs. Ward's note with it. She texted back 20 minutes later, "Let me handle my family." And I let her, because a man should know when he's not the hero of someone else's fight. 2 days later, Hannah invited all 3 of her kids to what she called A directional meeting at the main bakery. She told me to swing by and drop off a repaired mixer that afternoon. I might need a witness, she said, not joking. I showed up just before noon. The smell of butter and cinnamon in the air, the ovens humming low. I stayed by the back prep counter like a piece of furniture that didn't need conversation. Lexi sat on an overturned milk crate next to me, legs swinging, watching Tiffany pipe icing on sugar cookies like it was a sport. The Sanders kids were already in the back room. Clark in his work coat, Olivia with a planner under her arm, Braden leaning against the flour sack shelf like he wanted to melt into it. Hannah walked in last, steady, hair back, apron clean, no wobble. She placed the Olympus on the counter, pressed play, and let Trevor speak. "If I leave you one thing," his voice said, soft and steady, "let it be stubborn joy. Keep the places that smell like us." I watched their faces change in real time. Olivia blinked hard and looked down, eyes glassy but trying to hide it. Braden stared at the cooling racks like they were whispering something only he could hear. Clark checked his watch. Twice. When the tape clicked off, Hannah didn't flinch. She reached into a folder and pulled out a letter, Tiffany's name printed clean across the top. "I'm naming her assistant manager of the newer shop," she said, "because we measure worth in hands, not optics." Tiffany's jaw dropped. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "Completely." Clark opened his mouth, words already sharp. "You know we'll challenge that if we have to. This isn't how decisions—" "I've already retained counsel," Hannah said, cutting clean through his sentence. "Better ones." Braden, to his credit, spoke up. "I can help with deliveries on Thursdays, if that's okay." Hannah nodded. That would be helpful. Something shifted in the air, like drywall settling after years of tension. Not a miracle, but something. After the meeting, Hannah and I boxed up pastries for the shelter. She worked fast, but not rushed. Her movements were cleaner, more certain, 10 pounds lighter in the face, if not the body. "I'm proud of you," I told her, taping a box shut. She didn't respond with words, just reached over and squeezed my hand once, quick, like sealing something unspoken. That night, back in the shop, we were halfway through freeing the gear shaft on a second-hand mixer when Hannah's phone lit up again. This time she didn't mute it. Olivia's voice came through soft and clear on speaker. "I'm sorry I forgot who you are, and who you've always been." Hannah didn't say anything right away. She wiped her hands on a rag, then set the phone down carefully beside the open motor housing. "We fix things here," she said, half to herself. "Even the cracked stuff." Lexi looked up from her drawing and said, "That's why it's called Second Wind, right?" Hannah smiled without blinking. "Exactly that." We opened Second Wind Repair on a drizzly Thursday in March. The kind of rain that doesn't flood but just settles into your clothes and stays a while. I was still adjusting the doorbell chime when Lexi came in wearing a newsboy cap she'd drawn little gears on in marker. She pointed to the front counter and announced, "I'm the check-in boss now. That means I get to ask people what broke." Nobody argued. I nodded like she'd just been promoted. First one through the door was Mrs. Perry, clutching that same pocket watch she'd handed me months ago. I'd tracked down a new mainspring from a parts guy in Indiana who still took checks. Took me 3 tries to get the tension right, but by lunchtime it ticked again. She held it to her ear, eyes closed. "It's his heartbeat," she whispered. Then she turned away and wiped her cheek like she'd just felt a breeze. I let the silence do the work. Just pretended my eyes were dry from shop dust. Around 10, a man brought in a tube radio the size of a cooler. He said it played jazz at half speed and hadn't worked right since Reagan. I told him I'd take a look. Right after him, a woman carried in a mint green sewing machine older than me. Said it had belonged to her grandmother, and she couldn't get the bobbin to load without cursing. A teacher came in with a projector from 1998 and said, "The school finally gave up on this, but the kids still love the clack it makes." I gave her a low quote and no promises. She smiled anyway. I didn't do fast talk or sales. I wrote clear estimates, circled what I was sure of, crossed out what I wasn't. If I didn't know, I said so. Most folks seem to respect that more than Flash. Hannah came by mid-morning in a soft sweater and clean apron, hair pinned up like she'd been somewhere formal. She took her post behind the counter, just 2 hours, like she promised on the partnership sheet, and made the room feel less like a shop and more like a story someone wanted to stay in. She didn't ask people what was broken. She asked what the thing meant to them. "This belonged to my brother," one man said, laying down a busted electric razor. Hannah just nodded and wrote "family item" in the intake notes. It turned the room warmer than any heater I could have bought. Around 3, the bell chimed again, and Diana walked in carrying a green pothos in a ceramic pot and a thermos of something that smelled like hazelnut. "This is for the back table," she said. "And this," she held up the thermos, "is so you don't drink gas station coffee in your own business." Lexi skipped out from the back and said, "Miss Diana, did you come to visit my station?" Diana crouched next to her and said, "I heard you're in charge, so yes, I'm reporting in." We sat for a few minutes, all 3 of us, at the back table near the pegboard wall. The coffee was smooth, no bitterness, just enough sweet. Lexi leaned across and whispered, "Miss Diana, do you like Daddy's shop more than the library?" Diana didn't flinch. She smiled, slow. Different kind of quiet. I caught myself watching her hands while she sorted the intake forms. Steady, clean, deliberate. I didn't say anything. But after you get burned, even noticing feels like walking out on a frozen lake and finding it still holds. Mid-afternoon, Braden came in. Alone this time. He carried a ceramic lamp like it might break if he breathed wrong. "Mom likes the light this one makes," he said, setting it down carefully. "Do you think you can rush it?" "She likes it by the window." "I'll try," I said. "I've got a drawer of cords in the back that might save us both." He nodded. "Thanks. You don't have to. Just, she's been smiling more lately. I'd like to keep that going." I didn't charge him for the cord. Some things you do because they help the shape of things settle right. By the second week, I paid Hannah the first chunk on the loan. Early, not by much, but early enough to matter. She made a face when I handed her the envelope. "Are you trying to ruin the fun of this whole thing?" "I'm trying to sleep at night," I said. "Debt feels itchy on my skin." We settled on pie instead. Apple with a thick crust she claimed was imperfect, but tasted like pride. That night, after I finally locked up and turned off the back lights, I found a folded piece of notebook paper taped under the counter, in Lexi's handwriting. "We fix things because we know how it feels." I didn't move it. I just taped it up higher, where I could see it any time paperwork got too loud. Months later, Diana's sister came to a neighborhood cookout and told the story of how we still hadn't made a move. Her words, not mine. "They're the slowest 2 people on the eastern seaboard." I didn't argue. Careful suits me fine now. I've seen what happens when you rush into fire and expect it not to burn. Instead, I poured Diana another cup of lemonade and passed Lexi a marshmallow stick for the grill. She saluted me with it like a captain giving orders, and I gave her the nod back, same as always. By April, the snow finally quit lying about coming back, and Hannah planned a block gathering to mark 15 years of the original bakery. She said, nothing fancy, which meant 3 folding tables, a white tent, coffee urns, and cookies shaped like music notes for Trevor. The kind of humble that takes more effort than showy ever does. She asked if I'd set up a fix station so kids could see how gears and springs worked. I brought an old cuckoo clock with the back off and let them poke the mechanism, push the bird in and out, watch the weights swing. The line for that thing wrapped around 2 tables. It beat the cookie line by a mile, and that tells you something about what people still care about deep down, moving parts that still try. Clark showed up like he was headlining a ribbon cutting. Navy suit, polished shoes, even a fresh haircut that didn't fit the neighborhood air. Olivia came with her 2 boys in tucked shirts, and a smile stretched tight across her face like plastic wrap. Braden, though. He walked in with his sleeves rolled and headed straight for the stack of tables like he knew what to do. We hauled and leveled them together without talking. I decided I could like that version of him. Around 2, Hannah stepped up onto the little plywood stage the bakery crew had rigged, flour still dusting the side of her apron like she wore it as armor. Tiffany stood nearby, handing out napkins and keeping toddlers from knocking over the lemonade dispenser. Hannah cleared her throat. The crowd quieted fast. 15 years ago, this street took a chance on a woman with too much yeast and not enough sleep, she said. I still remember the first day I opened this shop. Trevor made the sign, and I burned the first tray of rolls so badly the smoke alarm quit out of shame. Laughter rolled soft through the tent. She held up the Olympus recorder, the same one we'd pulled out of that bin months ago. One line Trevor left me, she said, and I'll read it. The whole block went quiet, even the kids. Trevor always told me to choose simple, choose people. She didn't press play, didn't have to. The words were enough. Folks clapped, not that tight kind of polite clapping you get at speeches, but real palms on hands appreciation. I watched Clark's mouth press flat. Olivia blinked hard and looked away. Braden smiled at his shoes like they were saying something kind back. Then Hannah kept going. I'm starting a small neighborhood fund, she said, to help local tradesfolk, fixers, crafters, those who build with hands, seated by me and a couple friends. It'll cover tools, small permits, or rent for stalls. We're starting with 5 grants this year. She looked at me when she said it. I didn't nod. Didn't need to. We already knew who'd help her sort the applications. Clark stepped forward like he couldn't stand not being centered. He reached for the mic with a politician's timing. I'd like to add a few thoughts. Hannah didn't step back. She kept the mic firm in her hand, smiled without teeth, and said, Not today, Clark. This one's for neighbors, not memos. The crowd laughed, but it wasn't cruel. Just the kind of laugh that lets truth land without needing to shout. Later, after most folks had drifted home with full bellies and cookie crumbs on their sleeves, I handed Hannah a small leather pouch I'd stitched from a remnant. Inside was the Olympus, rebelted, cleaned, fresh batteries. Diana had helped me add a brass tag near the zipper. Hannah read it out loud, soft. Play when hearts get loud. Her hand brushed mine, and for a second, I didn't care if Clark was watching. Lexi ran over and said, Can we take a picture before the light goes weird? We stood by the flower bins, Hannah between Lexi and me, sleeves smudged, Lexi on her toes to reach my shoulder. Diana snapped it. I printed it the next day and hung it in the shop, right above the counter, where I could see it every morning when I unlocked the door. A few days later, Hannah came into the shop with a grin that didn't even try to hide. You want to hear something funny? She asked, unpacking a tray of muffins. Always, I said. Clark tried to get on the fun board. I raised an eyebrow. How'd that go? They told him no. She handed me the last muffin and added, I learned the word no holding a whisk, and I'm not forgetting how good it feels. I'm 56 writing this down, but back then I was 31, dead on my feet most nights and proud anyway. It's been years, but I still remember what 5 months felt like after that snow. The sign over second wind repair still made my chest feel bigger every time I unlocked the door. It didn't shine. It didn't need to. Business settled into a rhythm I could carry. On a good week, I'd fix 2 radios, 3 lamps, and a clock that hated me until I stared at it long enough to love it back. I paid down Hannah's loan quicker than I figured I would, and still kept pancake mix in the cupboard. That balance mattered to me, paying what I owed and feeding who I loved. Lexi grew like a dandelion in rain. One day her pants didn't reach her ankles, and her check-in boss badge didn't need help staying clipped. She'd do her little routine in the morning, log what folks brought in, then curl up in the chair Diana hauled over. I'd catch her legs swinging and hear her whisper, "We're a team forever," whenever my face got tight over bills or screws that wouldn't budge. Diana and I didn't rush anything. She stopped by with thermoses and community board clippings, and we took coffee on the front stoop like retirees on break. After school, we'd walk Lexi to the bookmobile and trade guesses on what hamster book she'd pick next. She made me laugh more than I'd planned on. Careful still suits me. Slow beats. Sorry. Hannah's grief didn't vanish. It just changed shape. Some mornings she'd show up early, stand at the counter with a cup she didn't drink, and breathe. Then she'd grab a rag and wipe a shelf like it gave her something to hold on to. I never asked. I just made sure the rag was clean and the shelf wasn't too high to reach. Clark didn't disappear. He still tried things. Emails with soft threats, quiet pressure about image, some comment about proximity boundaries. I kept his voicemail and the complaint copy in a folder in the back drawer I never had to open. The truth is, once he realized Hannah wasn't showing up just to be told how to live, he started pulling punches. Olivia softened. She started coming by with her kids, asked for cinnamon rolls without corners in her tone. Sometimes she'd sit for a bit and watch Lexi draw on shipping labels like it was a proper canvas. Braden dropped by one morning asking for oil for Hannah's squeaky pantry door. He stayed and helped me hang a new shop sign. Didn't talk much until we were done. Then he said, "Next time, show me the wiring too." And that was something. The Olympus lives in Hannah's kitchen now. I know because she brought it by one Thursday afternoon to ask for batteries. She smiled and said, "Still don't like the quiet when it gets sharp." The USB stick sits inside a chipped mug next to her tea tins, and I labeled a spare just in case. Some memories deserve backups. My favorite job, hands down, came from Mrs. Perry. She brought in the pocket watch again to check its manners. I cleaned the casing and polished the face, then handed it back ticking soft as rain. She closed her eyes and held it close like it was speaking in a voice only she could hear. "Sounds like him," she said. I nodded because I understood. Some things echo, and you learn to lean in. I tell Lexi, we don't fix things because they're worth money. We fix them because somebody cares. One night, after the shop closed and the dishes were done, I finally read the note my mother had sewn into the lining of an old quilt I never used. Just 3 lines, needle stiff. It said almost exactly what I'd told Lexi. I laughed, loud, in the quiet kitchen. Sometimes love finds a way through even after you think the door's been shut. If there's a moral, it's not hard to spot. Show up when it's snowing, even if it's a mess. Most gifts don't come wrapped right. Sometimes they show up in a paper sack with a wrong label. Sometimes they're a neighbor with a USB and the right amount of silence. On the day we hung that photo in the shop, Hannah, Lexi, and me at the block party, Lexi tugged my sleeve and said, "Daddy, remember? Team forever." I said, "Yeah, kid. That's the part that sticks." And I meant it all the way through. Hey, just one thing before you scroll. Have you ever had someone try to control your life just because they thought they knew better? What did you do about it? If this story hit you somewhere real, go ahead and tap that hype button to help more folks find it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Seriously, it's one click and means a lot to us. And if you've got a second, drop a comment below. Even a simple "great story" helps more than you think. Thanks for being here. Your support keeps these stories alive.